Why is the north of Italy so much richer than the south? Many of you know Italy as a popular vacation destination. Gorgeous beaches meet centuries-old high culture. Delicious food meets good wine. Apparently, the Italians know how to live in pleasure. Milan, Venice, Florence, or Rome are still glamorous cities with a flair of high society. However, the further one moves south of the country, the less splendid the surroundings seem to become. Instead, one increasingly encounters abandoned villages, disused factories, and people suffering from severe poverty. The difference between the wealth of the Italian north and the poverty of the south cannot be overlooked. With a gross domestic product of $35,500 per capita, Italy is among the 30 richest countries in the world in 2021. Nevertheless, the south of the country is one of the poorest regions in Europe and is developing even worse economically than the European problem child, Greece. Southern Italy, also known as the Mezzogiorno, comprises the geographically southernmost regions of Italy: Abruzzo, Molise, Campania, Basilicata, Apulia, Calabria, Sardinia, and Sicily. The population there averages only 64% of the nationwide GDP, while the Northwest generates about 120%. Per capita GDP in the north is thus twice as high as in the south. Although a third of all Italians live in the southern part of the country, they only contribute less than a quarter of Italy's national income. The north is the clear economic center of the country. Without exception, all 30 of Italy's top-selling companies are based in northern or central Italy. More than half of them operate in the banking or insurance sectors. Nearly 80% of the Italian chemical industry, the third largest in Europe, is also located in the north. The flourishing triangle of cities comprising Milan, Genova, and Turin is also known as the Triangolo Industriale because the most important and strongest economic forces are to be found here. Milan, the country's most important economic center, is internationally known as a stock exchange and fashion center, while Turin boasts a strong automotive industry, and Genova with its important transshipment port. In the south, industrial production, already weak, continues to decline. In many regions, people still live mainly from agriculture, despite unfavorable climatic conditions, such as the long summer heat waves. The lack of jobs is becoming increasingly problematic. While 5.7% of the population in the north was unemployed in 2022, the unemployment rate in the Mezzogiorno is 3 times higher, a full 15.2%. Young people in particular are therefore increasingly leaving their homeland to look for work in northern countries. Although Italy has received a total of €77 billion from the EU since 2000 to reduce regional differences in prosperity, this situation has in fact hardly changed in the last 22 years. The substantial difference between north and south seems to be an immovable law of nature. But it is not. In fact, 3,000 years ago, the reverse conditions prevailed. In 1000 BC, the region was characterized by its temperate climate and qualitative soil. Many different tribes literally fought over the fertile paradise, where agriculture and fishing were excellent. Thus, the first transport networks, trade routes, and colonial cities such as Palermo, Naples, and Syracuse were born. The region was characterized by a tolerant, peaceful multiculturalism and a flourishing trade. So how did the decline of this once promising region finally come about? Quite without intending it, the Romans took the first step in the wrong direction. In the spirit of agricultural progress, they accompanied their expansion with large-scale deforestation, especially in the Mediterranean region. To this day, these forest areas that were cleared at that time have not yet grown back. But the Romans' plan failed. In the end, deforestation had negative consequences for local agriculture, because in the long term it led to less rainfall and the drying out of the soil. With the breakup of the Roman Empire in the 6th century, the great chaos of occupation began in Italy. While the north was relatively quickly assigned to the Frankish Empire by the Carolingians, calmed down politically and was able to profit economically from the European boom, the south continued to be regionally fragmented for centuries and was subject to permanently changing foreign rulers. At the same time, the Catholic Church was also trying to establish its papal state in central Italy. The Carolingians, who ruled northern Italy, tried to balance the state between religion and politics. With success, their king Charlemagne is crowned official emperor by the Pope in 800 AD and establishes a feudalistic fiefdom system. However, the ruling emperors are so involved in the warlike disputes of Europe that they hardly enforce this system convincingly, but allow regional self-government. The municipalities quickly emancipate themselves and become increasingly independent of their feudal lords. The city-state system becomes increasingly successful. Benefiting from good relations with the church and proximity to major European powers, northern Italy quickly develops into an important economic center, while southern Italy is still stuck in Roman structures of manorial rule. In the 11th century, when the feudal system is already almost abolished in northern Italy, it is just being introduced in southern Italy. Until then, the region had been ruled mainly by Lombards, Byzantines, and Arabs. The successful campaign of the Normans put an end to this and united the multicultural patchwork under the name Kingdom of Sicily. In this kingdom, the feudal system of the north is to be taken over, with Norman mercenaries being granted vast lands over which they can now rule as barons. Even if the rule over the Kingdom of Sicily is to change a few times, until the 19th century, the strict feudal structures of the South are characterized by hierarchy, one-sided concentration of power, and structural dependence of the population. Since the focus is exclusively on agriculture and not on trade, the region also loses its last trade relations. The majority of the population is hopelessly exploited by the aristocratic upper class, which is why a middle class can never develop. Not only the population, but also the resources are completely plundered. To protect their lands and collect taxes from the population, the sole ruling feudal lords like to use so-called gabellati. Instead of being on the ground themselves, they lease their land to administrators who are supposed to keep the small tenants in check. They use brutal repressive measures to collect the high taxes and protection fees and prevent popular uprisings. Over time, the gabellati become more powerful and eventually begin to use their own protection troops for police duties as well. More and more, they become a criminal network from which the Italian mafia would later emerge. In 1861, the various regions of what is now Italy are united into a kingdom for the first time, the Kingdom of Italy. For the Mezzogiorno, however, this progress can hardly be considered an improvement. The new capital, Turin, has no interest in helping the south of Italy, but does everything it can to promote industry in the north at the expense of the south. Urgently needed land reforms fail to materialize. Instead, the Mezzogiorno is hammered with heavy taxes and the elimination of protective tariffs on agricultural goods. This leads to an extreme decline in production. Popularly led uprisings and revolts are consistently and brutally put down. Eventually, many farmers and small entrepreneurs gave up the struggle and emigrated in droves. In the climate of poverty and hopelessness, the influence of local mafia gangs such as the Sicilian Cosa Nostra, the Neapolitan Camorra, or the Apulian Sacra Corona Unita can continue to grow unhindered. The mafia exploits the mistrust of southern Italians toward its new rule and cleverly presents itself as an alternative that promises the inhabitants protection and justice. Thus, it steadily builds a kind of shadow government also called the Honorable Society. Only after the Second World War in 1945, Italy agrees on support programs to help the South. The investment and support program called Cassa per il Mezzogiorno was intended to stimulate autonomous development in the South by investing in infrastructure, education, and industry. However, the desired success has not materialized. Much of the money seeps into the pockets of the mafia and never reaches its desired destination. Others are simply poorly placed strategically. Small and medium-sized enterprises hardly benefit from the money. The infrastructure of the South remains poor and there are no resources or energy sources worth mentioning. Still, 30% of all traders in the South pay protection money to the local mafia. It is therefore hardly surprising that companies are rarely willing to invest in the south of Italy. It remains to be hoped whether anything can change the region's gloomy situation.